Hello, everyone. Both the in-house audience and what is it that I said, and the cyberspace, which really technically could be the entire solar system and beyond. So who knows who's listening? To another episode of Wednesday Night Live with Rabbi Jacobson, Sweetening Severities, How to Deal with Challenges. Interesting topic. So today was the 71st yahrzeit, the anniversary of the passing of Rabbi Jacobson, the father of my mentor and teacher and Rebbe, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe. So I felt, as he honored his father, I thought it would be an honor to my teacher to honor his father, since today was the yahrzeit. And he was a great mystic, Kabbalist that came from a lineage, I should say, an unbroken chain of many sages and scholars before him. As I said, he passed away in 1944 in exile. It's 1944, as you know, with all the devastation going on in Europe, the Nazis, the Germans, but the Russia, or the Soviet Union, was not far better. Stalin was in control there, and there was a terrible persecution of Jews in the former Soviet Union. And anyone who was active in any type of Jewish education or outreach or rabbinics, any type of leader, was literally persecuted, arrested for counter-revolutionary activity. And he was one target. He was the chief rabbi of a city that was then called Yekaterinoslav in Ukraine. Today it's called Dnepropetrovsk. I was recently actually in Russia a month ago. I didn't visit there, but you could see the renaissance of Jewish life, which is quite amazing after we know what the history was. So he died in exile because they ultimately they sent him off to exile in Kazakhstan, a very distant little land further east, southeast, and he ended up dying there in 1944 from illness, and you can imagine all the torture that went on. But what was unique about him, and that's why I chose this topic, was that it's fascinating to see through the eyes of a mystic like that how he looked at suffering, because he was in the abyss. And what's even more fascinating is that while he was there, he continued in every possible way writing, which he always did. He would write commentary. He wrote Kabbalistic commentary on the Zohar, on Tanya, on the Talmud, and so on. Now, he didn't have any ink because they deprived him of everything. So his wife, who was permitted for a while to be with him, actually would take herbs and different plants, and she would turn them, create ink from them. She would mix it and heat it. And that's the ink that he used, that today we can see on the gloss that he used in the manuscripts. You see his manuscript in green, in blue, in yellow, in orange, all different colors ink came from these herbs. So he took a situation which was literally a hopeless situation, a bleak situation, and turned it into an opportunity to write about, from a mystical point of view, what he went through. And there's one fascinating, which I'm going to base this class on, fascinating manuscript, or note that he wrote, about his imprisonment and exile, connecting it all to deeper mystical elements. So I thought it's a very powerful study to see how a person like that deals with difficulties, and tremendous lessons that we can learn from it. Because listen, life is such that it's inevitable that we will all go through setbacks, losses, pains, suffering in some way or another. That's a given. What's less common is finding a so-called approach of how to deal with that, how to navigate. How many people do you know can navigate through those difficult times? And navigate meaning having the fortitude, the strength, hope when it seems hopeless and bleak, energy when you feel all lonely and alone and completely isolated. So that is a far greater challenge. And is there a formula that can help us? So-called formula. So studying his life, from Levi Yitzchak's life, and his writing, especially of this particular manuscript that I'll be sharing, is a rare glimpse through the eyes of a person like that, how he looks at the same suffering that we all deal with. And I believe that when you really, when you look at it, you can learn the tremendous lessons for our own way of navigating through the shadows, through the darker moments of life, and our own darker crevices and the challenges we face. So I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's very Kabbalistic, but he begins this, writing this, where he writes, Ani, he writes about himself, I am Levi Yitzchak, the son of Zelda Rachel. He says, I've been sent to exile for 5 years in the area called Chiali. Chiali was the place that he was sent in exile, in the country of Kazakhstan. So Kazakhstan, you may be familiar, Kazakhstan is like a little north east of Afghanistan. All the stans are there. There's Kazakhstan, there's Kyrgyzstan. I'm sorry? Yeah. And he goes into detail how he sat in this, how many days exactly he sat. He says he sat in 5 different prisons over a period of 303 days. He was in prison before he was sent off 5 years in exile. And he connects every one of these details, the 5 prisons, the 303 days, his name, his mother's name, and the names of the cities he was in. He connects it all to his life, which he calls a life of difficulties. In Hasidic or Kabbalistic terminology, there are, you may be familiar with the 10 spheres. They go from Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvur, Tiferes, Netzach, Chayd, Yisod, Malchus. I talk about it quite often. I know that was fast. But briefly, it's three intellectual faculties: Chachma, Bina, Das, wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and knowledge. Sometimes conception, comprehension, and resolution. Then you have 7 emotional attributes or faculties: love and kindness. On the other side, you have severity, discipline, the discretion. So if Chesed is the gas, Gvura is like the brakes. Chesed is a free flow of giving. Gvura says, here you have to stop. Boundaries, not to just spoil somebody or destroy them with your love. Having discipline within your love, basically. Then comes compassion, Tiferet, compassion. Then come the next 4 are Netzach is ambition or determination. Then you have Hoid, which is humility or yielding. Yesod is foundation, bonding. And finally, Malchus is dignity, sovereignty. Here's not the place to go into them. If you're interested in more information on that, I have obviously my book on counting of the Omer. I go through the 7 emotions in detail, 7 times 7. Online on meaningfullife.com, you can find plenty of information on this. But I want to just focus on 2 of these, Chesed and Gvura. Chesed literally means love and kindness, but Chesed in a broader sense means all the bestowing of all the kindness in our lives, the blessings in our lives. So if you think about your health, family, all the things that you can thank God for, these are the chesodim, so to speak, the kindness that God bestows on us. And Gvura refers to the difficult times in life. So when you say in the mystical or the Hasidic lexicon, you'd say a life of chesodim or a period of chesed means a period where I feel my blessings. I can count my blessings. A period of Gvura is a period when I feel deprived, or I feel constrained, or I feel somewhat trapped. And they're both 2 divine attributes. Now, of course, we all prefer chesed. We all prefer that things go just well in a revealed way. But as I said before, life is a wheel that turns, and you don't always have chesed. You have times of chesed, you have time of Gvura. Now, we always hope that our Gvura should be minimal. You know, we all have moments like that. But the fact is, it's part of our lives. So he connects his whole life and his name. He says Levi and Yitzchak, both names are both Gvura, as is his mother's name, as is all the journeys he went through, and he connects them all to show how they demonstrate Gvura. Now, it's interesting, I'll just point out one line where he says, everything is by divine providence. So I'm clearly sitting here in prison due to my great sins, and may this be a salvation for me. You know, the humility to write that. He doesn't blame anybody. He doesn't say why others are not suffering. He's not busy being bitter. He basically looks at it as part of his own journey of healing and cleansing and just becoming a better, greater person. And then, of course, he blesses himself. He says that may God in his kindness, who will always be compassionate, have compassion over me and return me to the honor and also in the merit of my great holy parents, because he came from a great dynasty of Rebbes. May he redeem me from this dire place and bring me back to my home, to my wife, and to my children. that obviously that was not fulfilled in his lifetime. He passed away there in 1944, as I said. His son, his oldest son, who would become the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the mentor teacher I spoke about, had left Russia already back in 1927. Yeah, the end of 27, right after Sukkot that year, Tafresh Peches. So they hadn't seen each other. And I can tell you as a personal witness, the Rebbe had personal anguish for years over the fact that he could not see his father, and most important, honor him. Now his mother he did reunite with in 1947. She did leave ultimately. After her husband passed away, she left a year or two later. And in 1947 they reunited in Paris. The Rebbe flew from New York to Paris to greet her and bring her back to New York, where she lived until she passed in 1964. Literally between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and the 6th of Tishrei. And you could see the honor of the Rebbe to his mother was literally as busy as he was every day. And I remember this as a child, around 6, 7 o'clock in the evening. He would walk the few blocks from his office to her home and spend 10, 15 minutes or more pouring her a cup of tea every day, literally. Which was, a lesson, a tremendous lesson of honoring. You could say he's a Rebbe, he's busy, he's teaching, he's not busy making money, he's not busy with himself. And yet that's what he did. See, and you could also see in his talks how much he felt the void, the fact that he could not honor his father, which is a big thing, honoring your father. So he would really, I saw this, again, physically, I saw it with my own eyes, how much recognition, how much honor he would give people who did something for his father. People who stayed there in Russia and served him in some way, helped him out, make his life a little easier. But so bottom line is, though he did pass away in exile and he did not see his family and did not reunite, but we're here talking about him 71 years later. We are here. So in some ways his blessing was a little delayed, but it was fulfilled. Today it is chesed. Today Jews have been freed from the slavery of communism and of course of Nazism, and we live freely, thank God. Our only enemy today is within, which we'll talk about a little later. So those enemies that he had to deal with, people who just locked up a holy man, a mystic, a teacher, wasn't bothering anyone. All he was helping people, souls grow and journey. That was a threat to them, for no reason. Like it wasn't like he was caught doing something. It was completely just purely a spiritual man. But I have to say that over the period of time, even though he did go through those gevuras, those severities, as he concludes in this note, he says, the words at the end, he says, "V'hi ratzah, may it be God's will that quickly, yumtuku kol ha'gevuras, may all the severities be sweetened," and hence the title of this class. Because I feel that in a way, and it says, may they all be sweetened and all the judgments and severities be sweetened, and there should be a transformation of, Celia was the place and Sail is a shadow. So he said the place where he was imprisoned, the exile, the city of exile where he was called Sil. So may the shadow be transformed to light and to revealed good, and may I return to my home quickly. So we can say now to him, his soul is clearly with us, that ultimately this was fulfilled, not in his lifetime, but in ours. So any one of us is studying his teachings, any one of us inspired by his son, who is a Rebbe that has touched literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, at the end of the day, this man gets credit for that. It's not like he's looking for credit, but I just wanted to say that even though it's 71 years later, there's much to be said, and that's really how Jews have always survived, because we knew the story was not over. How could he be writing like this when he was in such pain and such a difficult situation? Because he saw the bigger picture, he saw the vision. And that's what I want to discuss, of how can we bring ourselves. Obviously, our challenges are far smaller than this. They're far smaller in the sense we don't have an enemy on the outside. Our enemy, as I will discuss, is apathy and our own inner in doubts and insecurities. But nevertheless, how do we gain strength of looking at challenges? It's one thing when things are going well, okay. But when there's gvuras, as I said, severities, how do we be able to look through the eyes of this person? So he's left us this document. Now you may wonder, where did it come from? Because he wrote it all there. Well, his wife, as I said, Rabbi Jacobson was her name. She brought some of these manuscripts out, and later others were discovered that were left there. But there are many, many more that were lost, and or maybe found at some point, because he wrote all his life. So we're blessed to have this manuscript. When I read it, it's quite fascinating, because here's a person, you just put yourself in his shoes, sitting in an abyss, in a dark place, and has the composure, has the presence of mind and heart to be able to write about his suffering and all put it into a spiritual context. That it all reflects the gvura, the severities of life, with the goal, obviously, of sweetening it, as I mentioned. So in truth, if you really think about it, and I think it's something I've talked about a number of times, another fascinating fact. I don't know if you've ever heard of in literature, there's recently it's become more popular, the different approaches to studying literature, and one approach is called deconstruction, where teachers and professors deconstruct a work of literature, an author's work, and by deconstructing meaning that they try to strip it of its details to try to understand what were the forces at work in the author's life when he was writing that book. So let's say you take Shakespeare, besides, of course, his powerful plays, but there's a lot about the culture that he lived in that is reflected in his writing. So they call it deconstructing. Deconstructing in that way and somewhat tracing and trying to understand the deeper forces behind the work of literature. I mean, whether it's Tolstoy's War and Peace, or Victor Hugo's Les Miserables, or Dickens' Tale of Two Cities, each one of them is a time period piece, which they wrote about their times. But they also, in some ways, you can find out about their own lives. Some of them were paupers, some grew up in prosperity. But here's the interesting contrast. When you try to deconstruct Torah literature, and what I mean that as you probably know, the Torah literature far outnumbers all the books ever written, because Jews were always the people of the book. From Mount Sinai till today, the writing and writing around. We have literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of volumes. And there's still manuscripts that continue to be discovered. So you have commentaries like Rashi, Shlomo Yitzchaki from the 11th century. Of course, Maimonides, Nachmanides. I mean, I can go through the whole list. The Balei Tosfos. These are people who in the Middle Ages, in the early ages, later ages, wrote not just a line or two. They wrote volumes and volumes. When you try to deconstruct and say, okay, what was their life like? You cannot figure it out. You'd never know. Just to take an example, many of these people writing, I would say most, if not all, were lived in Europe. Some in France, some in Germany. And if you study history, what was going on while they were living and while they were writing and composing these classic works, it was horrible. The pogroms of the Middle Ages, the persecutions, as you know, almost every country in Europe at some point expelled the Jews or killed them, overtaxed them. It was not an easy life. Jews were targeted, were marked in every possible way. The Crusades were going on in those period of time, the different Crusades, which was so-called the justification of killing any Jew in sight as they marched toward Jerusalem. So when Rashi was writing his commentary, outside were bloodbaths. Not every day, but it was a constant life of upheaval and fears. Now, Rashi had a family. He was definitely concerned about his wife and children, as was everyone. So you ask yourself, you start reading his commentary, you'd think he'd be writing about, what did Dante write? He wrote about hell, about the purgatory. I guess it reflected some of his life. They say Freud wrote about his mother. Everybody's writing about their lives. So you'd think that Rashi would be a master of writing about suffering. How do you deal with suffering? Or complaining or praying to God? No. He has this commentary, calm, relaxed commentary on the Bible that is today an indispensable resource in understanding Bible and Talmud. And you could see the writing was not easy for him. It wasn't like he just jotted it. It was hours, a lifetime of work. And he wasn't the only one. You could say, okay, well, man, Rashi had that presence of mind. But what about the hundreds of others? So when you read their commentaries, you don't see anything. You don't hear any bitterness. You don't hear negativity. You don't even hear about what's happening. Once in a while, they may refer to it in a letter or in some other, but not in their, they have this like almost completely detached from events going on around them. Now, if you didn't understand them as brilliant individuals and didn't study, you'd think they were in denial. It's like somebody making believe they're really going through the Holocaust, and they're busy writing about what does it feel like living on being on the beach, relaxed. Not that that's what they wrote about it, but I mean to say that type of writing completely oblivious of events going on around them. And I always wondered, what is that? And the answer is really similar to what Rabbi Levi Yitzchak. Exactly the same story. And what's the story? that when you have an inner soul beating inside of you, when you are very well grounded and you're at peace within, no matter what happens outside you will not change your composure. That doesn't mean you're naive. You'll do what it takes to protect yourself, but you're not shaken because you have a foundation that is unshakable. Most people are defined by circumstances of their lives. Today was a bad day, my boss said something this, a client said that, bad mood, spouse, whatever it is. And it can upset your whole day. Why? Because most of us don't live from inside out, we live from the outside in. Something happens, you can wake up in the morning and make a decision. Today is going to be the best day of my life. Yeah, as soon as you hit the subway or you come to work, someone says something to you and they upset the whole cart. And you're seemingly out of control. Why? It means because the resolution was honest, it was sincere, but you don't have the wherewithal and the resources to stick to it. It would be like someone who decides to set out on a journey, and I'm going to stick to the middle of the road, and then all kinds of forces, storms and others, and they can't keep to it. Means that they don't have that type of centering, it's not to have grounding. I'm not saying this as critique, I'm just saying it as a statement of observation. You see this all the time, especially in our modern age, where we're completely controlled by the vicissitudes and the circumstances of life. Just look at how so-called technology was supposed to emancipate and free us, and ask yourself, you may be sitting with your best friend, someone you completely love, and you get a text message. Are you distracted or not? So what does that tell you? What happened to your commitment? What happened to your loyalty? So instead it's become common. You sit in a room, in an office, let's say, in a meeting, well, everyone's texting, so what's the big thing? That just because it's collective rudeness doesn't mean that it's less rude. It just means everyone's doing it. Then there's someone who lives from inside where they are completely at peace with themselves. Other factors don't affect them. Technology is a good tool. Technology is like a hammer, a screwdriver. I'm sorry? Yeah, no, listen, this is not a fire and brimstone attack against technology. This is really an attack against human beings. We make with it what we wish. Junk in, junk out. Technology just speeds everything up. That's all it does. It's a number cruncher. If you have something to crunch that's valuable, so then it'll speed that up. If it's not valuable, it'll speed up nonsense. And it'll just clutter and inundate us. These people that I'm describing are tremendous role models because these are people who their lives were driven from inside out. It made no difference what was going on outside them. It's like the eye of the tornado. You can have a big tornado, but the eye is at peace. And you'll see people who have that type of grounding have that ability, that type of calm. And you feel it. I mean, I'm sure when you're around somebody who's nervous, you get nervous yourself. You're around someone who's calm, in some way, it calms you. Well, where does that calm come from? So we're not talking about now some naive child who doesn't know what's happening, is oblivious and living in denial. We're talking about someone who understands everything that's happening, but they have deeper resources. To use a story that I often use, who was the father-in-law of the Rebbe, basically the Mechutin of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the sixth Chabad Rebbe. So he too was arrested for counter-revolutionary activity in 1927. And after much persecution and ultimately forced to leave the country, and also was literally at the threat of death any given moment, he refused to cooperate. He writes in his diary, which he interestingly calls Masechta Gehenim, the tractate from hell. That's what he calls it. He describes the torture, the inhumanity, the dehumanization, and so on. So he tells a story how he refused to cooperate because for his own dignity, for his own spirit, he made a decision. I cannot be affected by my captors. I will not allow them to break my spirit. So he did things intentionally, like he spoke fluent Russian. He refused to speak in Russian, only Yiddish. He insisted in having his talis and tefillin, his prayer shawl and tefillin for prayer. Other things which would say, there's life and death here. From a halachic, a Jewish law perspective, you're absolved of many things when you're in danger like that. No, but for his spirit, he did not want to give in. And not out of abstinence, but simply for his own survival. Then one of the captors, who happened to be Jewish, the Jewish communists were the worst of all, because they were the biggest anti-Semites of all. So in Yiddish tells him, points a gun to his head and said, Rebbe, enough games, enough of this non-cooperation. This object here has changed many people's mind. With a pistol to the Rebbe's head. And the Rebbe looked at him calmly and said to him, this toy, called tzatzke in Yiddish, this toy, can frighten only someone who has one world and many gods, but not someone who has one God and many worlds, or two worlds. Think about that. Now, obviously, Judaism is not a culture of death as is some other religions. Judaism is a culture of life. We cherish life. Yet, you're not going to frighten me as if, okay, you're going to kill me and then it's not over for me. It's like, think of it in investment terms, diversification. We have eggs in more than one basket. You take away one basket, we always have another basket. That's what kept Jews going, even in the darkest of times. We knew the story's not over. Obviously, we want the blessings right now. And that's what he basically said. You can frighten someone who has one world and many gods. So you take away that world, it's all over. So he's threatened, he's frightened. But someone that has one God and many worlds, has a center, has a foundational center, it's not a God every day, another God. That God is unchangeable. And there are many worlds, there are many dimensions of experience. How could you kill somebody who's not afraid of pain? You can only destroy someone who only has one option. There are many options. And Rabbi Levi Yitzchak in this document, this short document, as Rashi and the Rashba and the Rambam and all the others in their difficult times all demonstrated this, that they were able to enter a place when everything was dark and hopeless. They were able to find within themselves that God that would be unwavering and nothing changes. And if you spoke to them, you would not know that they are existing in such suffering circumstances. They suffered, but they did not become sufferers. They did not allow anyone to identify them. No one projected, they did not allow anyone else to label them, to shape them. Those are great people. People are not shaped by others. They're shaped by their beliefs, they're shaped by their inner values and by their inner strengths. These are people who can't be bought. These are people that makes no difference what price. The cynics like to say, I know you can be bought, just tell me the price. As if it's a given. Because most of us, we judge others by our own selves. We know that we're not able to be trusted, so we don't trust anyone else either. But then there are rare individuals in life where you meet, and you can see clearly after a while, even if you're a skeptic, these are people who material world doesn't make a difference to them. You can't buy them. Their inner core is the driving force. And you see this in their writings. This is the only way to explain how a man in such suffering circumstances could have written such a document where he literally describes his suffering. He's he's talking about his suffering, but describes it all in Kabbalistic and mystical terms, that these are the severities of life, and explains it in his own personal life and even his prisons. Even refers to both prisons. The 5 prisons are the 5 gvuras, 5 different types of severities. Again, I'm not going to go through all the details because it's a little dense. But the point of the matter is to look at everything in life and see a deeper understanding of it. So most of us find it easier to do when it comes to positive things. You go out to a meadow, you see trees, you hear birds, the grass, the blue sky, the sun shining. So you could see them all. If you think about it poetically, they were all manifestations of some type of spiritual energy. But it's far harder to go into a place where you don't have any beauty. All you see is darkness. All you see is pain and suffering. How do you see the divine hand there? It's all dark and bleak. So I'll share with you a story that captures it somewhat. Going back to the previous Rebbe that I mentioned, 1927, another thing he said to one of his captors when they asked him, do you know where you are? Like they wanted to impress upon him that he's in a place that he has to be afraid of. So he looked at the individual and said, yes, I know where I am. I'm in a place that is potter from a mezuzah, meaning a place that does not need a mezuzah. We put mezuzahs on our doorposts, except certain doors we don't put them. On a bathroom door, and on a shtal. How do you say a shtal? A barn. So he was basically saying, that's where I am. I'm in a place that doesn't need a mezuzah. Basically. So even though he was insulting them, but in a way he was bringing the divine message that I'm in a place that also has a divine element, the divine concealment. So there's a story between the 2 brothers, Rabbi Elimelech and Rabbi Zusha. They were 2 brothers, and they were once, again, one of these stories in the back around 150, 170, 60 years ago, maybe a little more. And they were once imprisoned for some, again, counter-revolutionary activity against the Tsar or whatever in those days. And they were both sitting there, and one of them was very depressed. So his brother says to him, we learned from our teachers that you have to always serve God with joy. You have to always be happy. He says, so why are you sitting? I mean, the reason we're in prison may be a false accusation, but this too has to be seen as a divine opportunity. So he says to his brother, I'm not depressed about sitting in prison. I'm depressed at the fact that we can't make a blessing on the food that we're given. Because in the cell, they had a little bathroom, a pail that was used as a bathroom. You're not supposed to make a blessing. So really, that's what's bothering me, that I can't make a blessing. So his brother says to him, the same God that said you're supposed to make a blessing on food said that in a room like this, you're not supposed to make a blessing. So you're also fulfilling God's will by not making the blessing. He suddenly jumped up and said, you're right. Time to celebrate. And he began to dance. Now in the cell were other people, and they all began to dance. The Jews, mostly non-Jews, and they're all dancing. The prison guard, who was a particularly vicious anti-Semite, came running over and says, what are you dancing about? What's this dancing? So the non-Jews said, we don't really know, but the rabbi is dancing, so we're dancing. But why is the rabbi dancing? He said, we don't know, but it's something to do with the pail in his room. They knew that. So the guard was so angry, he went into the prison, he pulled the pail out and said, you're celebrating the pail? I'm pulling this pail out of here. And suddenly, he was able to make a blessing on the food. So you see how life is. To be able to see light in the darkest places. They used to say about Ronald Reagan, I think the royal optimist is the farm boy that goes into a barn and he sees it covered with manure all the way till the ceiling. So most people would say, oh, you know what? And he says there must be a pony in here somewhere. So everybody, we see a liability, someone else sees an asset. These are people who have a certain inner sense of clarity. The mere fact, and this is not a critique, this is part of the human condition. When we are affected by, let's say, a painful or suffering circumstance, what the biggest problem is not the pain or the suffering, even though that is the ostensible cause of our discomfort. The problem is what you do with it. Most of us immediately, I personally identify with it. It says, even though maybe consciously we don't know this, but unconsciously, this just proves how I'm worthless, and why am I suffering, someone else is not suffering. Blaming others, becoming bitter. Basically, it demoralizes us, and we lose ourselves in the suffering. And now we are completely defined by our circumstance, by our experience. The best proof that you don't have your core, you don't have your core base that really nothing should shake you. That's where the real problem begins, that you don't know how to deal with it because you identify with it. And it confirms your own inner fears and insecurities, etc., and all the worst type of scenarios. Now, again, this is not a critique, it's just the way we were trained. Unfortunately, we live in a very superficial world. So when things are going well, we more or less take it for granted. As soon as something doesn't go our way, we don't have any tools to handle it because all we are left with is, okay, listen, I deserve it, or why is this happening to me? The bitterness that comes with it, the anger, the resentment, the anger at the people that maybe perpetrated it, a whole list of scapegoats. And some may even be legitimate. But you are not lost. You're lost in the experience. Now, you can't really see it until a person is in a difficult situation. Because as I said, when things are going well, everybody looks like they're powerful. But when do you really see which trees are strong and which are weak? Not when there's a nice, beautiful weather. In a storm. When the storm strikes, then you suddenly see which tree remains standing and which one falls. Which ship can withstand the storm and which one cannot. You can only see it when things are difficult. What do they say about women? They say that a woman's like a tea bag. You only know how strong she is when you put her in hot water. So you look at a tea bag and you didn't know what it was. It's a little bag with some tea leaves in it. You have no clue what it is. You suddenly put hot water and it emerges. Suddenly, wow. Or as the Talmud puts it, that an olive does not produce oil until you press it, until you squeeze it. Now, no one should have unnecessary and undue pressure, but pressure is what makes things grow. Every form of energy is a result of two poles, positive and negative. Every form of energy is a result of some form of pressure, some resistance, some electromagnetic or some other form of resistance that causes. Think of whether it's water pressure, air pressure. So water pressure, if water is flowing regularly, okay, you build a dam that resists the flow, the water starts building up, and suddenly you realize it has enormous power that you would never have imagined. The same is emotionally and psychologically in our own lives, that the real strength that we gain is when we're challenged. But again, if you don't have that inner core that you're in touch with, when you're challenged, so the wind just blows you away and you're lost at sea. When you have that inner core, so it's not like you suddenly love all this the challenges and this pain and suffering, but what it does is it challenges your core to bring out even deeper strengths. That's what you see when you read a document like this. You see a person who looked at a situation in the face, took the bull by the horns, and described his predicament in context of what he was trained to do, to see it in spiritual context. It wasn't not comfortable. Clearly, he doesn't want to be in this predicament, but that's what he did, and left us a document that we can read today. Today, when we read it, you can feel the pain, but you see more than the pain. You see what he left. The pain is gone. It's long gone since 71 years ago. But what's left is a document of a person who grew through his pain, who saw it in a completely different context, and was able to look at things and be able to forge ahead. And as I said, even though he didn't see the salvation in a revealed way, but he allowed the next generation to come like ourselves, and we do see it. I mean, what do you need worse than the Holocaust? Again, only 70 years ago. Where literally 6 million of 18 million Jews were completely decimated. There isn't even a tombstone to remember them. And then the rest of the 12 million, most were traumatized, many families. So even those that survived, barely survived. And it affected everyone. And you would think, as you read newspaper accounts in 1945 after World War II, were newspaper accounts that write the collective obituary of the Jewish people, by the year 1990, I've read articles like this, from 1945 to 1990, 2000, there will be no Jews left on earth. And mathematically they were correct. Why? 6 out of 12 of 18 million. The other 12, many of them had no family, had no life, had no home. There was no Israel yet as a state. The Jews in America were assimilating very quickly and intermarrying. So if you think about it, and so many rabbis and teachers and leaders were all destroyed. They completely destroyed. The center of Jewish life in Europe for over almost 1,000 years was completely eliminated. So if you had to predict, of course, how could 12 million, they'll die out. Their children are not embracing the tradition. So how long can it last? Well, look now, even though we have our challenges, assimilation is there, and we have other challenges, but Jewish life thrives. We're still small, it was only 14 million strong. But what is it, 40, 50% of the Nobel Prizes are Jews? Jews make a lot more noise than their numbers, as we know. Israel dominates the headlines, even though it's only the size of New Jersey. Because there is that inner spirit that's here for 4,000 years. And that never dies. So even though anyone standing during the Holocaust would look at the situation, complete bleakness. I mean, they were literally gassing Jews thousands a day, cremating them. I don't want to even repeat all the atrocities. That makes your blood boil. Because we would have been them if we would have lived then. We just happen to be living today. Men, women, children. No difference. It made no difference if you were affiliated, unaffiliated, Orthodox, conservative, Reform. Made no difference. So Jewish, half Jewish, quarter Jewish, whatever their calculations were. And yet we're here. And we're the grandchildren of those Nazis. They bury their faces. They hide their identities. They don't want anyone to know where they come from. And this is not once and throughout history. The same thing was with the communists. Same thing with the Tsars, with the pogroms, with the Cossacks, with the Inquisitions, with the Crusaders. Go back throughout history. Where are all their grandchildren? Where are the Babylonians? Where are the Persians? Where are the Assyrians, the Greeks, the Spanish? Where are they all? Where are their grandchildren? No one even knows who they are. And we're here, so few in number, but we can speak proudly about our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents going back thousands of years. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, who doesn't know those names? That's not to be taken lightly, because that's like a secret of longevity. Everyone wants to know what the secret is. Business people, I know, studying Jews. Why? Because they want to understand what creates continuity like that. Walmart would love to know that in 4,000 years from now they'll still be dominating. You know? Who doesn't want it? When the people visit the Dalai Lama, if they're Jewish, he always asks them, he says, why are you coming to me? You guys are here longer. You have everything you need in your Judaism. And as a matter of fact, he asks, how did you maintain that commitment without a country? Because he's in that situation. He's exiled from Tibet and wondering what's going to happen with his next generation. So this is things to be appreciated. Many Jews are not even taken for granted. We don't even think about it too much. But there was heavy price. We didn't go through, it wasn't easy times. Some have even argued it's because it was so difficult, that's what shaped us into becoming so resilient and indestructible. But however you explain it, it ends up being that because there's some core essence that is not affected by the destructions and the holocausts and the genocides and all the darkness that life can bring. A deep core that is indestructible, that is as indestructible as God. Why? Because it comes from the soul. Now we live in a world where all of us have souls, but the soul is really neglected mostly. Our lives are mostly driven, as I said, by material success. You ask people, what does success mean? They'll say financial, power, influence. Some people will say also bring up a healthy family, but it's not always the top of the list. The first thing is what I just described. What's considered success? All that tells you that the person does not have a core that they're focusing on. They have a soul, it's just not being nurtured. And no one's to blame because that's what our parents told us, and that's what our schools tell us, and that's what's considered to be success. If you ask someone who's a solid soul person, they'll tell you success is only one thing. Am I in touch with myself and with my mission for which I was sent to this earth? That's all that matters. Everything flows from there. If I have that, then I will build the right family, I'll build a healthy environment around me, I'll be a healthy, positive influence. If you don't have that, you basically end up becoming, in one form or another, a narcissist, self-absorbed, self-interest, insecure, which is a direct result. You can only be as secure as the things you value. You know, I remember years ago giving a talk, it happened to be in London, in Canary Wharf, the business area, and it was a talk that was scheduled months earlier, but as the divine providence would have it, the morning of my lecture, Lehman Brothers closed down. So there were hundreds of layoffs, and instead of having, let's say, 100 people to my lecture, I had almost 1,000 people, because they were all laid off that morning. Anyway, so my talk was, interestingly, what was it titled? Is your self-worth defined by your net worth? Couldn't be more apropos, because here are a bunch of people that just lost all their jobs in the finance industry. Interesting, right? So of course my talk was about this topic, that your self-worth has nothing to do with your net worth, but very few people look at it that way. Net worth is what defines you. Even though you can't take the money with you, your money does not last forever, but we worship temporary things. We've come to worship impermanent things. So let's be honest. How secure can you be if your whole life is built on an insecure foundation? That's temporary. Your security is therefore also temporary. Now you may not acknowledge it. I know Prudential likes to call itself the rock. In finances they call it securities. I always find it ironic. How secure can it really be? Because that's what they want, financial security. But by definition, it's a security that's very relative to the impermanent things in our lives. I understand with finances you can buy anything you like, you can cover your expenses, you won't go destitute. But that only covers basic survival. That's survival. Security is only based on something. If a building is standing on a foundation that's porous or shifting, how strong can that foundation be? Well, everything in this material world is impermanent, is shifting, is changing. Nothing is not subject to the laws of nature, of aging, deteriorating, eroding. That's how it is. Whether it's our health, whether it's our age, whether it's our finance, whether it's our food, anything. things get depleted. Which area is there absolute security? Only one. In the world of the soul, in the world of spirit. Because it's not defined by time and space as we know it. Soul does not age. It gets wiser as the years go on, because it's not defined by these parameters. So the only real thing that one can say is absolutely secure is their belief system, is their values, is their spiritual commitments, which can be translated also into the love of your life, into the family that you build, but those are not material entities. Those are also expressions of something that is ethereal and not physical. That's why love goes on even when a person dies, God forbid. If you love someone, you love them forever. You love them even if they're physically not here. You miss them, as a matter of fact. Why? Because it's not what you didn't love their bodies, you love their souls. You miss them because you want to see it, you want to touch it, you want to speak to that person. But what is it you're connected with? Something that is not mortal, something immortal. Now, this resonates with everyone. Even if you're not a religious person or you don't have a belief system in that sense, everyone can understand the logic that you can't be secure with something that's insecure. Insecurity cannot bring security. Simple as that. And there's no question the reason, oyev kesef lo yizba kesef, it's a Hebrew expression which means as much money as you have, you always want more. Why? Because unconsciously we all know that money can be depleted. It's not something permanent. So therefore, as much as you have, you're always concerned, maybe you'll need more. Or, as some cynics put it this way, the more you have, the more pain there is, because then you need to protect it. And then you need someone to protect the protector. It's like you need to get insurance, then you need insurance for insurance. Then you need someone with insurance for the insurance. Like you have a lawyer, then you need another lawyer to watch that first lawyer, because who knows if he's not ripping you off. So it becomes a vicious cycle of protection after protection, walls after walls. And then you find people, like I mentioned, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, his Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, and the different people I mentioned earlier throughout history, that if you met them, they're the wealthiest people on earth. Because their wealth is not based on accumulating anything from outside. Money, anyone, it can be confiscated, can be lost, and so on. Sir Moses Montefiore was a great philanthropist. He Montefiore hospitals in Jerusalem. He rebuilt Jerusalem in the 19th century. He was a great Jewish philanthropist based in England. Moses Montefiore, very benevolent and great philanthropist. Yeah, he was good friends with Queen Victoria, who was a personality of her own in England, in the United Kingdom, Great Britain, and they would have conversations. And she once asked Sir Moses, she said to him, "What is your net worth? Like, how much you're worth?" So he said he has to get back to her. He has to calculate and let her know. Now, she was no slouch herself, you can imagine. He came back and told her some number. And she said to him, "You mock me, Sir Moses. I personally know that you have holdings that are far beyond the number you just gave me." So he said, "No, Your Majesty, I told you exactly what I'm really worth. What I'm really worth. See, what you know, what the bankers think, is what I have right now in my possession. That's what I possess. It's not what I own. I possess it. But tomorrow, a bad investment, I could lose it. A war breaks out, you decide to confiscate it. It's just a matter of time. So I'm not deluding myself with the things just because I hold on to it right now, it's mine forever. The number I gave you was the amount of charity I gave out in my life, I distributed in my life. Because that nobody can ever take away from me. Because I built what I wanted to build with it. Hospitals, schools, cities. That never can be taken away. Because it's what I gave. It's not about what I possess." Obviously, she was impressed, especially because it wasn't just a line. He actually was a major giver. Now, it takes a lot of strength for someone to do that. Most people are just not givers, they're takers. So a lot of people like to say, you know what, if I make $1 billion, then I'll start giving charity. Let's not kid ourselves. A giver is a giver even if you have a penny. You just give commensurate to what you have. If you're not a giver, you're not a giver whether you have $1 billion or you don't have. A selfish person is a selfish person. And much of selfishness can be attributed not necessarily because someone's born selfish. It's basic insecurity and a complete distortion of priorities, what really considers value. So money becomes the symbol of value. It's the power I have, the power I yield over others. I see how people worship it. It reflects my ingenuity, my time, my energy, my outsmarting others, whatever it is. But it's a impermanent foundation. Now, even when we know this, we still worship money, by the way. So just saying the statement doesn't suddenly change things. That tells you how seductive the tentacles of this material world are. By contrast, there are people who that all does not matter. They're very clear in their mind. They understand the difference between owning something and possessing something. They don't live in a world of acquisition. They live in a world of spirit, and spirit is more about giving than taking. Spirit is more. We live in a world of acquisition. I want to acquire. I want to control. Look how it affects relationships. How many relationships suffer because one or both parties want to be in control? But love is not controllable, true love. If you control it, you're defeating its whole purpose. Because we live in a world where control is a symbol of strength. The strongest people are the people who don't have a problem with no control. All you need is control within yourself, that you control your moods, you control your attitudes, your reaction to things. Instead of being controlling others. Control yourself, control your attitude. You know, the Talmud, the Mishnah says, Ezu Gibber, just like it says, Ezu Asher. Who's the wealthy one? The one that is satisfied with his lot. What that means is that he's at peace within. That's a real wealthy person. And who's the strong person that the Mishnah continues? HaKevesh Sitzre, the person who can control himself, control his temptations, control his distractions, so to speak. So these are people who have a different way of looking. Now, I'm not suggesting all of us can suddenly become the mystics and the tzaddikim like Rabbi Leivik and Rabbi Levi Yitzchok and others who went through these difficult, but we can learn a lot from them because they're our ancestors, they're our teachers, they're our role models. You learn from them that maybe not all the time, but next time you have a difficult situation, maybe step back and say, okay, 1 second, why am I becoming overwhelmed and allowing the situation to define me? I have much more in my life than just what's going on right now. I have other blessings. It's like forcing you to dig deeper. Most of us, that's not our inclination. Our inclination is you right away get consumed with it, and it takes over. It overwhelms, it demoralizes, and it just defines you. And you start doing whatever it takes to self-medicate or numb yourself from the pain, escapism, etc., etc. So what we learn here is step by step. No one has to suddenly change their entire life, but to start looking at things with a little deeper vision and realize all you got to do is look at the Jewish people, that we made it till here. Is as difficult as things were. Someone must have seen something. You know, think of yourself. I don't know. We're not in a situation where we're ever, thank God, have to go be recruited in armies. But imagine you're fighting a war, and you have your fellow soldiers with you, your fellow colleagues, and then there's of course your superiors and there's the commander-in-chief. Okay, now you're fighting this war. Things are going very well. You're marching forward. You're conquering territory. You know, plan is going well. Then there's suddenly a setback. One day, some friends, God forbid, are killed. The enemy begins to advance. You're surrounded. Things don't look so good. So most of us, if you think of it, without training, are going to run for cover. I'm out of here. It was good when it was it lasted, but now I'm out of here. I'm not interested in this. But then you have a commander-in-chief who you suddenly see comes to the troops and says, listen, we have a setback, but here's what we're going to do. Number one, you see the confidence that even though there's a setback, he does not change. Same confidence he had yesterday when things were going well. He's absolutely convinced that we can win. He says, here's what we're going to do, and finds a new strategy. What's the difference? What does that make you feel like? That changes everything, because he's not controlled by these events. The events don't define his confidence and attitude. He's realistic, but he looks at this situation. These are the type of people you want to have in your life. People, when they see a problem, that's how they look at things. Unfortunately, many of us choose friends like ourselves. So if we're weak, we choose weak friends, and that way everybody's reinforcing their own insecurities and say, yeah, look how bad it is. You'll see people that love to talk about all the negatives about everything, because it just makes you feel better when everything is negative, because then you're not such a failure. When you're around someone who's at the commander-in-chief, they're driven by a completely different engine. Their engine is the vision ahead. How do we now, okay, we have a hump, we have a resistance, we have an impediment. How do we get around that? And the same is true in every area of life. Even sports. Athletes get into a funk, even brilliant, genius sports people. And you need someone who has the confidence in you. You can lose confidence very easily, even though you may have the talent. A lot of it is psychological. The same is true in education. The same is true in relationships. People who do not have that type of attitude, even if they're neutral, they weaken us, because then they reinforce that type of, oh, you can't really do anything, what are we going to do, this and that. Whereas this attitude comes and recognizes that you have within you a soul. And every morning we acknowledge it. Neshama Maidani lefanecha, we acknowledge for returning my soul to me. Shalzata bin nishmas. It's not just a statement. It's saying your life is not driven by your body and by material needs. Your life is driven by a soul and its vision. And the more you see that vision, the more anything that comes your way that day has a whole different way of looking at it. If it's a great thing, you learn to use it for positive and not take it for granted and use it toward growth. If it's a negative thing, you see it as a challenge for you to overcome. And I know it's easier said than done, because all this is intellectual, it's all cerebral. The challenge is emotionally. Emotionally, our minds may tell us, yes, I can conquer it, but my heart sinks. And you feel down, you feel insecure, you feel lack of confidence to be able to do it. So the solution to that is, again, a slow process. It's first of all to be around people that are upbeat, that believe in you. Sadly, we often, as I said, surround ourselves with people who just reinforce our own negative scripts. You have to find people who have a positive script for your life and believe in you and consistently do so. That's number one. Number two, you have to nourish your soul. There's no two ways around it. You can't be busy all day with your body and then expect that when you need your soul, it's going to be there for you. It's like anything. It's weak if it's not fed. Now, how does one feed the soul? So the Torah tells us there are three pillars. There's the mind, there's the heart, and there's actions. The mind is studying. When you study Torah, you study spiritual ideas, you study even what Rabbi Levi wrote about the difficulties. What happens is it takes your mind, allows you to open up new horizons, new possibilities. Because remember, if you can't cognitively imagine something greater for yourself, it's very hard to imagine it emotionally. So you begin with a cognitive approach. So even though emotionally you may be resistant, at least try to dream, try to imagine, try to hear the picture. Say, I may not be there, but at least I can dream about it. I can envision it. The next step is emotional, which is working on your emotions. It's usually prayer is an emotional experience, which is emoting. Maybe you have to cry about your situation. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't mean tears of demoralized tears. I mean tears of strength, tears of recognition, tears of yearning and pining for something greater. And then there's actions. Acting confidently, even if you don't always feel it. This is through acts of charity, through volunteerism, doing things that help other people, to serve others. These actions, even though they're behavioral, but combined with the emotional conditioning I mentioned and the cognitive, are the three prongs of attack that if you start building those, they start creating a more confident person. It's all based, of course, on the principle that you have a soul within you waiting to be released. A soul that is indispensable, indestructible, as I mentioned, and has all the tools it needs to deal with any situation. This is what you learn when you read the Rabbi Levi Yitzchok's note. You learn how he took a situation which, as dark as it gets, and turned it into, he translated it all into actually some mystical formula for defining severities, which is like a map. It doesn't mean it was pleasant, but at least he found deeper meaning even in the darkest moments. Viktor Frankl wrote an entire innovated an entire school of psychology called logotherapy, man in search of meaning, based on one thing, being in this concentration camps with observant Jews. And he saw the people who lived lives with meaning, even though they suffered just like everyone else did, they had an additional thing going for them. And that was the asset of believing in meaning, even in suffering. They tell this story about this particularly vicious Nazi who was about to kill a Jew for no particular reason. And the Jew asked him, can I say something before I die? Of course. And he begins to whisper a prayer. The Nazi gets all infuriated. He says, what are you saying? He says, I'm thanking God. He said, what are you thanking God for? You're a miserable, wretched Jew. I'm about to kill you at my mercy. Where's your God? And the Jew responded, I'm thanking God for creating me not like you. They told the story. So it speaks for itself. That even in the darkest moment where you seem to be the victim, the bottom line is, I'm not you. I will go with dignity. And I know that if it won't be me, it'll be my children. If it won't be my children, it'll be my grandchildren. The firm belief that you can kill my body, you can't kill my soul. You can kill my life, you can take my life, you can't take my beliefs. And there is a future. There is a destiny. There is a destination. And now, at the moment, you could think this Jew is insane. But look at what happened, and time tells. And this is true for the record across the board. It's not even about beliefs, religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs. Every time a plane takes off, I'm on the plane, I always marvel at the fact that around 100 years ago, or a little more than 100, by now 120 years ago, 110 years ago, there was Frank and Wilbur, the Wright brothers, and they decided they're going to create a flying ship, as it was called. Now, I always think to myself, okay, in 1900 or whenever, 1905, Kitty Hawk, wherever it was, so they come to, let's say, an investor, and they say, we need $100. Okay, it was a lot of money for them, but $100. To do what? We're going to create a flying ship. Tell me, what would you say if the two people came to you with such a suggestion? And there was no planes yet. You'd throw them out of the office. You belong in an insane asylum. You're crazy. Wasting your time. Birds fly. Just because you see a bird fly doesn't mean you can fly. But they set their mind to it, these two lunatics. I don't know what drove them, to be honest. They decided they're going to fly. And now what do we have? Long security lines. You got to take your shoes off unless it's pre-TSA. The pain of traveling, as we all know. It's a whole industry. It's not an industry. It's a city. You go to an airport, it's a whole city. It's not just a plane once in a while. You know? It's a whole thing. 100 years later, they pulled it off. And it got more improved and refined and became a whole thing. Last few years, the airlines decided to make the shareholders happier than the customers. That's why it becomes such a miserable experience. That's actually a fact what I just said a few years ago. It used to be customer service was number one. Now it's the shareholders. That's where everything is being charged for. It's all that. Not as comfortable to fly as it used to be. Anyway, point that's an aside. A doctor used to come to this class. He was a medical research. And he had set his mind that he's going to find a cure to few illnesses that are so far incurable. Not the famous ones. I forgot what the names were. They were more rare diseases, not cancer and heart disease and so on. And he considered himself an atheist. He used to always tell me, he said to me, your classes I like, but I'm an atheist. Your God I can deal with. That's what he would tell me, always. Okay, fine. Whatever that means. Like Levi Yitzchak Berditchever, who said to the self-proclaimed atheist, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. I guess it was something like that. So, but he met it. So I used to always kibitz with him and say, how are you so sure that you're going to find healing? You spend so many years, your entire reputation, your entire life and money on this research. How are you so sure you're going to find a cure? He says, absolutely there'll be a cure. I said, how do you know? Maybe some things are not curable. I egged him on intentionally, and he kept on saying, no, absolutely wrong. So I said, you're a bigger fanatic than all the religious fanatics I know, because it's completely irrational. You just believe, that's it. You don't call it God, you call it the power of healing, the power of nature, the power of whatever, the immune system in the cosmos. You just have a different name for it, which I absolutely believe. People commit to something, because that is a force which is admirable, because it means nothing will shake him. It doesn't matter how many setbacks he'll have, how many failures in the lab will happen. He's not stopping. And you see people who've done it, many have prevailed. Not all, but many have. And even those that didn't will tell you, I don't have any regrets, because I believed in it. The fact that it didn't happen, come out, fine, but the belief is still there. The belief, my strength, I was not going to give up. This comes from a different place, a different dimension. And all of us have that capacity, mind you. So we're not off the hook. It's just some people are fully aware of it and act on it. And most of us are bought into the myth that we've been programmed in this society that you can't relax, take it easy, you don't have to be such a success. Some things are not possible. We basically, our idealism, especially of our younger years, has been, has waned. Cold water, right? That's how it is. But then those that hold on to their idealism doesn't die. Talk about Rabbi Levi Yitzchak's son, the Rebbe that I knew, my mentor, 92 years old, same spirit, the same energy. Physically, yes, perhaps weaker. But the spirit, the sparkle in the eyes. I remember when he turned 80 years old. What are most people doing when they turn 80 years old? Staying up all night till 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, or even 8, I don't even remember what time. Giving out tanyas. Now most people, birthday, you receive gifts. He decided to give gifts, which actually makes a lot more sense. On a birthday, you should be giving, not taking. But we live again in a take society. Taking. Someone told me a few years ago that they were at a birthday party, and a little girl, they brought in a birthday cake. She was 6, 7 years old, so it had 7 candles. Okay, blow it out. And she said something remarkable. She said, we Jews don't blow out candles. We light candles, because she lights candles every Friday. And I thought to myself, tremendous. Blowing out a candle is like blowing out life, blowing out light. Why was that like some type of virtue? Why would a birthday child... I know it's a subtle thing. It's like almost subliminal. But essentially, it's a message that we blow things out, especially a flame. In Judaism, you light candles, everything. Ner tamid, it should always be burning. Your soul should always be burning. Ner Hashem, the soul of a human being. So I don't know. Maybe this can become viral. Maybe the new custom should be put 6 candles and have the girl light the candles, or the boy. How about that? Just a submission, an idea. Everything begins somewhere. Maybe this idea will catch on if we pass it on. The point is that it's a very different way of looking at life. It's looking at life at always with that type of optimism. But it comes from somewhere. It comes from you're tied above, you don't fall below. You're connected to that spirit. So I was reading this note. It's unbelievably inspiring. I know, when you read it, it's painful, because you read prisons he was in. But he took a situation and he did the best possible thing he could do with it. He immortalized. All these prisons, by the way, are all closed down. But this document is not. So all that remains is the Kabbalistic meaning of these prisons. Can you imagine? Even the prisons were redeemed. Like the pail in that cell that I mentioned before. That's the power. That you even take things that were negative and you immortalize them, but not for their negative element, for their positive. Who would even know about Egypt if we didn't celebrate Passover and remember Egypt every day? So basically what we do is take our liabilities and we turn them into assets. I'll give you one more example before I conclude, and that is, you've heard of the Haftarah, right? On Shabbat, after we read each weekly portion, there's the final portion, the final one called up to the Torah is called Maftir. And that person is given the honor to read the Haftarah. What's the Haftarah? The Haftarah is usually a section from Nach, from the book of prophets, from prophets, not Nach, prophets, that has similar theme then to the chapter in the Torah. When, at certain times of the year, like now actually, we're not reading from the Parsha, it's connected to the time we're in. The 7 weeks of consolation after the 3 weeks of affliction, which will then lead to the 2 weeks between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, of Tshuva and so on. Now why is there a Haftarah? Why do we read a Haftarah? The portion of the Torah is based on an edict that Moses decreed, that they shouldn't go 3 days without reading Torah, so we remember the Torah, it's our life, our sustenance. Just like a person can't be sustained without 3 days without drinking water, Ein Mayim El Torah, Torah is compared to water. Why the Haftarah? Well, it's due to a negative story, a bad thing. Time of the Romans, for whatever bizarre reason, they decided to prohibit the reading and study of Torah. So it was by the threat of the death penalty, you cannot read the Torah. For some reason they sensed that's where the power of the Jews are. Now the Jews were smart, and in a good lawyerly fashion, they said, no problem. We won't read the Torah. But they defined the Torah in a limited way. It's the 5 books of Moses, Chumash. Nevi'im is a book of prophets. Technically, you can say it's not the Torah. Between us it is, but the Romans didn't know the difference. So they began reading only the prophets. They found in the prophets something that reminded of the theme of the Parsha. So they didn't read the Parsha, they only read the prophets. Then the decree ended, of course, at some point. So you'd think, okay, the reason is finished. So no more Haftarah. Let's go back to the original. No. By Jews, there's no such thing. If you add something, even if it came for a negative reason, but it's a positive thing that you added, you never decrease in light. You added light because it was darker? Good. Now we stay. So till this day, we say the Haftarah. This is real lesson in healing. In all healing. Whether it's addictions, whether it's fears, insecurities, psychological issues, scars, emotional scars. You don't just heal, you find strength even in that which was once a liability. And what remains is not just there's no liability anymore, what remains is only the positive strength that came out of the weakness. So you continue doing what you did as a result of that setback, but now all that remains is the positive, just like all that remains is this document, where the prisoners and those that who are the captors and the prisons and that whole regime is gone. But what remains is this eternal document that Rabbi Leivik wrote, the darkest of moments, that remains forever as an inspiration for us to look at our severities. And the expression is sweetening the severities, because it says that when you extract, the greatest sweetness comes from things that are bitter. You know, perfume. Where does perfume come from? From smells that are not exactly very, very pleasant. When you remove the toxins or you remove the negative, they have very strong smells. Perfumes come from skunks. Not all of them, but from mollusks and other type of creatures that give off a stench that you don't want to be smearing your body. But the same thing in any given situation. Everything that has a negative energy has tremendous positive energy that you just have to know how to elicit. So ultimately, when you sweeten the severities, they're far sweeter than sweetness that was never severe in the first place. Because you're extracting from a concentrated energy something positive. Like I mentioned before with the tea bag, the challenge, the hot water brings out the strengths of something. Just like the pressures and the deadlines and the things that challenge us can bring out deeper strengths. So ultimately, the severities are meant to be sweetened. And when they're revealed as such, their sweetness is far deeper than any sweetness that would come naturally. That's why you'll find some people who've gone through very difficult times. When they come through it, there's a certain dignity, a certain glow that you see people who suffered, who've gone through the fire, when they've dealt with it properly. They have a certain refinement you don't find in people who didn't have that same type of challenge. Now, this is not advocating nor endorsing challenges. It just means that there's something. What is it that happens? There's some type of level of sensitivity. I've seen it time and again. People who've gone through difficult and have, in a healthy way, dealt with it, they're unbelievably refined, more than you'll find in regular good people. So there's good that's good, and there's good that comes out of the so-called shadows. That has some power, that the refractive light has a power that the direct light doesn't always carry. So I hope I did some justice to this yahrzeit of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, in going through his Rishima, his manuscript here, this note, and hopefully all of us can take out strength, especially in this time after we come from the 3 weeks of affliction, as I mentioned, the shadows, the dark, now 7 weeks of consolation, that are about finding a deeper healing after there was abandonment, after there was betrayal, after there was something that broken. A deeper strength that comes. Hemingway put it this way, that all life breaks all people, and some are stronger in the broken places. He wasn't one of those someones, because he went on to do what he did with his life. But the rest of us can learn from that. That's true. We can be stronger in the broken places. So God should bless everyone not to be too broken. But if there is a break, remember that it's an opportunity, as Leonard Cohen says, to let the light in. A deeper light that it can never be revealed without that crack. And we should only celebrate good occasions, sweet occasions, and sweeten the severities that sometimes we're faced with in life. And know that there's always something stronger than any darkness and light, a deeper entity, a core that is unshakable in each one of us. And that's what we at the Meaningful Life Center are dedicated to. If we can be of any help to any of you in this regard, please reach out to us. And please leave us your emails or send us an email just to stay connected. And until next week, we'll not be giving a live class. I will record a class from Israel. I'll be in Jerusalem. It's a last-minute plan. So I will be going to Jerusalem and be sending a dispatch from there. But then the class will resume in 2 weeks from now. And if anybody wants me to say a prayer for them in Jerusalem, in the wall, or send some charity, I'll be happy to do so. And until 2 weeks from now, we meet again. But next week you'll see me. I won't see you. But I will use the powers of technology to not be shaped by technology, but let technology be an amplifier of what we share with each other. Thank you very much.